Carlson, and I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Critical Mass. And I'm surrounded by some amazing friends today. We're here to chat about a subject that we think is very important, and that is artist rights. How can agencies and brands collaborate more effectively from a place of empathy with artists in the world at large? And today we're kicking off a program that is our Artists in Residence program. And our partner is Shantell Martin, who's here with us today. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me and everyone for being here. You know, I'm an artist, an advocate, someone that is working across different mediums and different industries, someone that's working in, academia, commercially, in galleries, in museums, but fundamentally someone that wants to support an institution or an industry that I believe in. And I feel like, we all believe that art and artists would be, really integral and important part of our culture, but we don't really support them. So, I'm excited to have more conversations like this where we get into the nitty-gritty of figuring out how we really support artists like myself and therefore many, many of the other artists that are out there in the world.
Thank you both for inviting me to be a part of this as well. I'm Michael Ventura. I, for the last 2 decades, have run a series of different brand strategy and design firms, helping organizations figure out how to do what Shantell was saying. Bring together the commercial and the fine art world, bring together idea makers and commercial thinkers in order to make something more meaningful happen. And over the last couple years, I've really found that empathy is a big key to doing that, a way to get out of your own perspective and to take a look at the world from someone else's point of view. And that's part of what we're hoping to do today and over the course of this program, is to really see these different perspectives and how to incorporate them into strategies to make the world a better place.
Beautiful. And I'm so grateful to be here too, so exciting to be with every single one of you. My name is Heidi Berg. My pronouns are they, them. I am queer, trans, non-binary. I am a director and a creative who works with clients in film, television, commercials, documentaries. I have over 13 years of experience of applying my craft to motion graphics, main title sequences, post-production, VFX. And I'm really excited about this because I'm wanting to help build better pathways for voices that aren't heard so much, and especially within the trans and non-binary communities. So this is really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And I'm Ari Kuschnir. I'm the founder of Missing Pieces, a new wave production partner for, again, straddling this world of brands and creators, makers, directors. And I've been on a quest also in the last few years to activate stories that create better futures now. So I want to bring that into the conversation as well, this idea of it's not just supporting the artist, but it's making art that makes the world a more beautiful place, which I think we all need right now. So I'm excited to get in dialogue and get going. It's exciting.
Thanks, Ari. So we're going to kick it off with a question. Just at the highest level, we've been talking about brands and businesses and creativity. Let's talk about how we define the value of that creativity. Can we talk a little bit about the business side of this and how you sometimes run into challenges maybe with the return on investment or defining why you're doing what you're doing? Do you want to start?
Yeah. So, it's interesting as an artist that is always put in this category of what is that ROI on an artist? And it isn't as tangible as any other business. And sometimes for a reason. And I think that's often, and perhaps, I'm a little bit kind of jaded on this path, is that, as a living artist that makes the work, you have a consumer or entities that consume the work, but now we have all of these people in between. And when you have that many people in between, it almost becomes like a butler system between a living artist making the work and someone consuming the work. And along that path, it's become taboo for the artist to even talk about money or to even talk about business. But what they're essentially doing is creating that culture, is creating that product, is they are creating the thing that people want to consume and that they want to buy. They are creating things in real time, in the moment, that speak to the culture. that speak to certain times. And because we have this kind of system in between things, it means that it becomes something that's consumed, but consumed not for their benefit, because we also have this romanticization of a struggling or starving artist. So yes, you can be creative, and yes, we can consume and take from you, but we're also going to keep this infrastructure or this facade that you should be struggling and not know about any of these other aspects of your business. So I think there's this integration between there just not being the right balance there.
Ari, can you pick up the ball? You work on the production side and you have to do a lot of negotiating and you work with agencies, so you kind of see it all. Are there points that you have here?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like sometimes directors know that it's a renting the craft type of thing, and you're approaching it from that perspective. Sometimes you have directors who are much more artists, and those artists, it's almost like it's better if it's a commission type thing, approach with them, and I think that's where I hear some of Shantell's sentiment as well, because it's the business and the structure of it is so baked in for 20, 30, 40 years, and even though we're supposedly the new wave, we still have to adhere to some of these rules, and maybe we need to break these rules is what I hear in part of the conversation as well. But yeah, I mean, we do encounter things where it's like people will come to I think this happens to Shantell as well. People will come to a certain person and then will literally on the like, to be very tangible, to give a tangible example, like the boards are all the references to all the work that this person has on social media, and then they want them to triple bid because that's what the client mandates. It's a triple bid job. You know, that's the deal we have with X brand, is what the agency's telling us. Well, now this is to the artist when they get this board, which is essentially 95% all their work, and they're being told that they have to compete against 2 other directors for a work that's inspired clearly by the artist. That feels not cool. That feels unfair. That feels like there's something about the process that's not quite working, and I think that's part of what we're dissecting and trying to figure out with this conversation and with the process that you're embarking.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And thank you for sharing. It's tough on us when we see that on our side, because we want that person to, and the processes that are put in place sometimes do get in the way of
course,
beautiful work.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts about things getting in the way?
Well, I'm resonating with this because like I've like on the other end of that, like I've been on, freelancing at a studio, I've been on the receiving end of perhaps being one of those other people who were in the triple bid and seeing this deck that has work that is that is somebody else's work. And so you know what they're going for and you know what they want, but it feels, you feel the ethical quandary. Like I feel like I'm being put in a position where now I have to perhaps replicate somebody's work, perhaps steal somebody's work in order to get the job. And so that, I feel like that is really key. Like really, what is the intentionality of doing that?
Right.
Very quickly, what's a triple bid?
Triple bid, 3 directors are bidding for the same job in production. This is typically how it's set up. It's supposedly it's created so that people wouldn't just go to the same director all the time and kind of like not, so that it's fair, the process is fair. And it is fair when it's an open thing, but when it's clearly inspired by one of those director/artist/creators work, it feels totally unfair in that sense. And it's actually happened again. So it's happened twice in 2 different ways. One more inspired by the social, and one more inspired by a project someone did. Where it's like, this feels a little bit, there's something, and then if you go to the agency, well, they say, well, we have a deal. We have a thing signed, an agreement that says we have to triple bid. So then it's like, whose fault is it really? How do we break that cycle? Is there a way to intervene directly and seeing it clearly, have it become a different system for that particular type of project?
I love thinking about that. Absolutely. Michael, I would like to ask you about culture changing work. I think we have a lot of brands in the world that are really interested in tagging on to culture or creating culture through artists. Can you speak a little bit about that topic?
Yeah, for sure. So I think when brands want to shift or be a part of, maybe not even change, but just join the conversation culturally, they have to take a step back and understand where their authenticity needs to come from for that, because not every brand belongs in every conversation. And so just because this is picking up momentum and people are paying attention to this, it may not be right for your brand, your values, the things you stand for. And too often it is that sort of tendency to hitch your wagon to whatever the trend du jour is. And people are smarter than that. Like, give people some credit. They're going to see through that. They're going to know that this isn't actually authentic for you. And so a question that I like to ask is, have you taken a step back and asked, where would it be authentic for us to show up? And have you asked your collaborators, where do they think it would be authentic for you to show up? Because the easiest answer isn't always the right answer. And I think the tendency is sometimes just go to the path of least resistance or go to the thing that we've done 5 other times. But the artists, the collaborators, the individual contributors who are out in these worlds and seeing these things have a really strong opinion that should be invited into the dialogue.
You're saying no pizza NFTs.
Yeah.
Basically. I don't know. That just came to mind as a rando example.
I think as artists, you must feel pressure sometimes to have dialogues or create things that maybe aren't exactly what you feel inside.
Yeah. You know, I think Ari used an interesting word earlier, which was renting. And, you know, just to extend on what you're saying as well, sometimes it doesn't feel honest when it feels like you're renting and you're not buying into it. So, you know, as a Black queer woman artist, you know, every time Black History Month rolls around or Pride rolls around, then brands reach out to me. And it's like, well, what are you doing for these communities in the long term? How do you take some of this marketing budget and create things that will go on for decades or for multiple years, or, you know, even when it's March and it's Women's Month? So it's like, well, yes, you can do something that's culturally relevant to Black History Month or Women's Month or Pride Month, but then how can you really build in a good foundation and buy into it instead of renting into it? And that's what it feels like that's happening a lot of the time.
Yeah, there's an issue implicit in even saying it now, reflecting on it. So I'm glad you brought that up, for sure. Thanks for bringing that up.
There's a, you know, this is not it's too broad of a brush to say that this is the way everyone shows up, but there's a laziness also about this, that like, it's easier to do that in Pride Month to reach out, but wouldn't it be really hard, but also really important to think about what are those 11 other months and what are those next 5 years and what might we need to change institutionally or thematically or culturally in our organization, that if it matters in that month, it should matter in all months.
Yeah.
And that's hard for people to sometimes move that rock up the mountain, but that's the work to do.
Yeah, and you know, that's just the perpetual like cycle that we're in. So it's not to say that there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just not done authentically if you're not invested in it. And so it's just about finding those ways of integrating it in a way where, like you said, we can all see if it's not done authentically. So what is a way that we can do that? It's just to think about those other months and filling in those other gaps.
Yeah. Projects, not campaigns. Someone used to say that all the time. Let's do projects.
And then projects become campaigns.
Exactly.
You know?
Out of the project comes the campaign, but you can't reverse engineer it the other way.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, and then let's just donate or do something.
Yeah.
It's the afterthought.
I often feel that it would be great if brands were coming to me as an agency leader and saying, I've really thought through, you know, a couple things that I want to achieve in the world, and here are 5 people, artists, that I think are interesting. I feel like our system sometimes is backwards. Like, I don't want to put pressure on our clients to do this, but I think it should be a little bit more of a holding hands or a partnership than it is.
Yeah, and it's also about follow through. So when you want to work with different communities, then when you give them that agreement that they sign off on, it also reflects that you're supporting them. Because often once you put that client agreement in front of them, you're taking all of their rights away, you're taking this away, you're taking their moral rights away, they're waiving this, they're waiving that. So do you actually support that community if you haven't followed that thread all the way to the end?
Right.
And if you haven't asked them.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too. I think there's so much of a desire to presuppose that, oh, we've read enough that we know what that community must want. And but have you asked, and have you listened, and have you made that investment in understanding where what they actually might want from you, and what they might want from you might be to not get involved, you know, and to accept that too.
That, I feel like you're also touching on something that comes up so much for me, like in the post-production world where you have these studios and there are a lot of artists that work within these studios. Some of them are quite nameless because like it's part of a system, it's a structure. And consent, asking, right? So when projects come into the studio, it is almost like one can just be assigned. You show up on a Monday, maybe you're permalancing, something like that, and you have a project that you're on. Well, perhaps that project doesn't like align with you. Perhaps this project doesn't like maybe fit something that you can offer to it. But there is a power dynamic in play at that point where do you want to risk being that person who's just like, I don't feel comfortable on this project, or I don't feel like I have the skill set for this project. Like you don't want to rock that boat because this is like how you're making money. So I almost feel like if there was that ability to have a conversation with the artist and see like, do you think this is something that you can bring your skill set to? Is this something that you're interested in? Because I don't think people are truly thinking about the nuance of how to fit artists or certain jobs. We're just pre-assuming like what they're going to be good for.
Missing intuition and empathy. The process is missing intuition and empathy.
Yeah.
Well, there is a lot behind the scenes that has to do with numbers, right? I get excited about what's happening with TikTok because you see all of these incredible artists emerging from all different corners of the world. But I also see brands being extremely confused by that, not sure how to integrate. And then you see stories of people sort of being taken advantage of. I feel like we're at a tipping point in regards to what we do to support artists of all kinds and the brands that interact with them. You guys have thoughts about what's happening with social channels as well?
I mean, I see it more in the kind of rallies of the world where it's like the creator can just mint their own token and become their own brand and become their own, and then everyone else is out of the picture. It's as direct as it gets, but there probably is a subset of people that want to operate like that or benefit more from operating that, and then there is a subset of people that want to be collaborative and do want to share their work. Again, it's maybe this in between the renting, which now sounds kind of weird, but the collaboration, let's say, with brands, that does need rethinking for sure.
Yeah, I think the social landscape is so closed in a way because you have to play to these algorithms to be seen, to gain followers, to have any traction. And kind of the argument is well, if we told everyone what to do to be seen, then it would be used by nefarious people, and then they would use it to, excel and take over, accounts and like that social landscape. So I think a lot of brands or platforms or medias have tried to navigate this sense of like when people have enough resources to game that system, they will do. And then you leave out the creator kind of behind because, then you end up just not being able to be seen or not being able to move. But, like you mentioned, places like Rally, I made a Who coin for my community, but then it's like you still need to get that word out there and then you're back in kind of the same boat or the same position. So I think it's just, it's a general balance that, I think they're trying to do good to get the creatives out there, but then there's a lot of people behind the scenes kind of gaming that system as well that, doesn't help.
That reminds me of sort of this spectrum of ways brands can play in this space, because not all brands are built to do all of the different ways you can show up. So the organizing principle I've often used is some brands are good creators, right? And that they in and of themselves know how to create well. And so working with other creators leads to better collaboration. Some brands are not terribly good creators, but are good at curating. So we don't necessarily know how to make this ourselves, but we know how to find the right people who are aligned and we can invite them in. And then the last end of it for me is ones that are just conveners, which is not a bad thing. Like sometimes you just have to be the container where it takes place. And knowing where your brand's strengths are and operating from them and not trying to be something for everybody is actually a really good path to getting authentic wins on the board.
Yeah, I also hear the difference between commission and work for hire, right? So then the commission, it's a mixture of the rights and creative control, I guess, is what it's come down to. And I'm curious, like, where you would want to be. I mean, ultimately, I feel like you're more in the commissioned, owning the rights to the work
Yeah.
because it's so you.
You know, what's wrong with artists owning the rights to their work or creatives owning the rights to their work? You know, I think that it's become this kind of brand or client just legal issue where the easiest thing is just that we own it.
Right.
You know, and we own it for perpetuity, forever and ever and ever. But ethically and morally, is that right? Just because that's how it's done and that's the standard way that we do it, it doesn't have to be like that. And the issue is sometimes when it gets to that question, it's just we get to a legal person that is built to win. You know, my in-house legal is arguing or up against someone else's in-house legal, and I'm just trying to win.
Yeah.
I'm not looking at a creative or an individual as someone that is independent, that doesn't have the resources to go up against someone like that big. And so I think often it's just a little bit of educating or even just humanity in the sense of just saying, hey, like when you work with an individual or an individual creative or artist, your company could bankrupt them 1,000 times over and over and over. So do you really need to win every single point? Do you really need to own everything forever and ever and ever? And do you need to have it for perpetuity? Because ethically, things might change. And so it affects you for the time that you work in that company, but it affects that artist or that creative for their lifetime and possibly generations after that. So I think it's just about, you know, bringing some humanity into those conversations. And so it isn't just this win-win situation. We can actually see who we're dealing with on both sides.
Yeah.
Well, this is where the coalition could come in handy, you know, where you had a lot of like-minded artists joined and, you know, set some terms or present a kind of like best practices to the industry that
Yeah.
could be, you know, followed.
And,
That's a way to counter the monolith.
Yeah.
and having an opportunity to redefine what winning might mean together.
Yeah.
Right? To be able to say, like, what's a win for you and a win for us? And how do we figure that out and go after that together as opposed to this loggerheads kind of approach where, like, there has to be a loser to be a winner?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just that machine is so big that a standard contract is a standard contract. And then, you know, because to change anything, it goes through too many people. So just the more conversations that we have and the more that we can see like, hey, there is an accountability and a responsibility to putting this out there and not being willing to budge and change. So I think the more conversations that we have and the more people that are even familiar with that's the landscape of what it is out there, then there is the ability to change.
Yeah. Yeah, and also like education available for artists, especially first coming into the industry. I know when I first got into post-production, you know, I was going into these big factories of just many, many artists. I didn't understand like the NDAs I was getting. I didn't understand the contracts I was getting. I didn't understand like what I was signing up for. You know, sort of try to feel my way around and try to talk to other artists. But I feel like if there's more of an open dialogue and more of just like an open conversation so the artists kind of have the resources to make better decisions at the same time instead of just signing things away and sort of being effective at a later point.
We've talked about a couple myths. One myth is that someone like a Shantell has a whole team behind her, and therefore, you know, she can handle herself,
Yeah.
right? There's this other thought about the fact that you talked about this earlier, this starving artist, this idea of that being a beautiful thing. I think we want to knock that down, right? Like we've talked so much in the past couple months about how detrimental that can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what does the world look like when we actually support our artists?
Yeah.
What does that type of world look like?
And what do we think we would need to say to brands to help them through this process?
The monster in the room.
Right?
It's just
That's
like,
the $1 million.
What are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Let's start there and start to understand, like, what is the real anxiety you have about changing things? Is it because it's just hard? Well, sorry, like it's time to do the hard stuff, right? It's been time.
Yeah.
Or is it because it might shave a point off your margin for a little while? But what are the knock-on effects of that? Like actually to build those relationships, to have those long tail effects of actually reaching communities with authenticity and showing that you've invested the right way. There's no bad outcomes in the long run for doing the right thing, but the short-term implications of them are sometimes so monster under the bed for the powers that be that they don't want to tackle those things. But it's, you know, the time to change organizations for the better is late. And so it's time for some to step up and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have so many brands that ask us, help us with Gen Z, help us understand this generation, give us the data. And it is what you're saying. It is getting out of a short-term mindset, right? It isn't about the data against a generation. It is about really thinking long-term and getting your organization to get comfortable with that. And so I think that takes change within organizations. It takes loud voices.
Change within each person too. And there's like a kind of beyond self-development type thing that needs to be brought into the conversation as well.
Shadow
Change-
work.
Yeah, well, just change yourself, change the, change the, that work starts internally. And I think people are more open now to talk about that and to go there and make that part of the process. So it's not just like, here's the new system in place. We're going to be more open and cool with the artists. It's like tapping into the inner artist and doing the creative work and doing the shadow work and doing, bringing that, the trauma work, all those pieces into it so that you're showing up in a better way. Each person is showing up in a better way, and the organization is, as like you're saying, is kind of rising in its own way. And I feel like we start seeing examples of this, but minor kind of little islands versus the bigger boats rising.
Yeah, we need like a paradigm change, right?
It feels that way. I mean, I think that's why you're here.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this,
Yeah, something like this has been important for me for many, many years at this point. And, just like you said, Ari, it's about showing up in a different way, but also imagine if we can all leave everything we touch in a better place than we find it or than we found it. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm an artist. I've been through this system, and I know that I can make it better. And I can make it better for myself, but also everyone else that is around me.
Right.
And so if I can do that, then why not? And I feel like if we take that approach to any aspect of our life or any aspect, doesn't matter what industry or medium that we're working in, let's just try and leave it in a better place than we found it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
What about mentorship?
Mentorship. It's so key. It's so key. And I feel like specifically it really depends on which aspect of the industry you're looking in. But for my industry and like in post-production, like coming up, there were not opportunities laid out in terms of like mentorship. It was kind of what I was alluding to earlier, where one just kind of like pulls oneself up by the bootstraps, kind of like desperately like looks around, Googles a bunch of like tutorials and tries to like teach themselves so they can like competitively get ahead of everybody else. But what would have been great is to come into a system, maybe not a system, but come into an environment in which there are people there ready and willing to sort of guide you through the process, and like I had the luck to sort of run into a few very like gracious individuals who did sort of like take me on set, who did sort of like sit me down and show me what the pitch process is. But I don't see like enough of these pathways sort of like given to new artists that are coming into this work and just really needing to see the lay of the land from a perspective of a professional who's been doing it for a long time.
Yeah, and one can imagine even in the version of you starting out. I mean, so in these big brands coming to them now, and like, I mean, just such a challenge to navigate those waters for some of those people who have no context.
Yeah, there's no roadmap.
Right.
There's no roadmap.
There's nowhere where they can go and just see, here's how you should, if approached, here's some of the things you can think about.
Yeah, and like I said, there's no roadmap, and it's almost like by design. Because then if I did know what the landscape or what the road looked like ahead of me, then I'd be a lot more educated, and then I'd be less likely for people to exploit myself and other creatives.
Right.
Yep.
I also think there's an opportunity to reframe mentorship to be more bidirectional, because right now, or even 360, because right now people think mentorship and they think top down, right? They think like, because you've been doing this for 20 years, you've got the answers that the person 20 years your junior is looking for. That person who's been doing it for 20 years might actually learn a lot if they learn how to listen to that person who's 20 years younger than them too. Not to say that either has all the answers, but that mentorship should be reciprocal and that it should be beneficial to both parties. Because if one's only giving and one's only receiving, it's imbalanced.
Yes.
And so how do you find the yin yang of that, where you're actually working together to sort of create that sum greater than its parts?
Yeah. Share your notes, share your notes, share your notes. Yeah.
Exactly.
So good. And what's coming up for me too is like, this is the problem I saw with like internships, right? Like there's the intern that sort of gets like thrown onto a job with you. It's just like, oh, help them out a little bit, right? And it is that power dynamic of like, you need to teach them things, but there's no sort of like holistic approach to that. There isn't like a conversation. It isn't a true collaboration. So in that mentorship, like, is it sort of like bringing somebody through a project from beginning to end and actually empowering them in a way where they hold a position where it's not like you're an intern. It's like we are in a partnership. Now you might be like, you know, a little bit like down the chain in terms of like years and experience, but this is a partnership, and exactly what you're saying, like we can learn from each other. And how does that look at the end of the project?
We're being asked to do this as an agency. So we did a little survey of some of the junior talent that was going to come in the door, and they specifically asked for these things. They said, we want to be exposed to the process. We want mentorship from all sides. We want to talk to the client. So, I mean, this generation really does understand that that's how it should work, and they expect transparency.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of transparency in this process right now.
No.
So
And
if
also
you-
like room to fail, do you know what I mean? Like a safe space in which to make the mistakes, that is like literally the growth edge for becoming who you're going to be as an artist, is like through those safe moments of where you just spectacularly like totally fail.
Yeah. The failures bring absolute beauty to the process.
Yeah.
I mean, they're so helpful.
Yeah, and that's the thing I'm excited about. You know, we've asked a lot of questions here, but with this program, over time, we're going to be answering those questions and giving those resources and giving good examples. And so, you know, I'm excited just to see this program grow so that people can ask those questions, but then we can also answer.
Would you say one of those key things would be like end the buyout? Is that like one, like that the buyout should not end it, but should not be
You have to expand on the buyout.
the buyout of like the thing where they come to you and they say, we want, you know, in perpetuity, we want to own it forever and ever and ever. Is that like one of the key things for you to like?
I think that's
push
just
back
one
against?
very small point that
Right.
just it's not ethical and it's
Right.
not responsible.
Right.
Why should anyone sign off anything that affects their great-great-great-great-grandchildren
Yeah.
for a brand project?
Yeah.
It's ethically not right. So I think if as soon as we point that out to people, they'll be, oh, I don't want to do something that's morally not right, you know? But it's just about that education and that exposure and that transparency and just pointing out what things actually mean in the real world.
What are some other things that brands and agencies can do to better collaborate with artists?
The thing I keep like running into right now is like ever since we've talked about shadow work, and I know I'm talking about shadow work on like the individual level, right? But what would that look like for a company, like a whole company, to actually do the shadow work around who they are as a company? What would that look like? How would that shift their paradigm?
That's my jam. I love that. That's like my favorite thing in the world to talk about. I'll be succinct, but I think one of the things that we have to do in that work is figure out what we need to stop doing as much as what we need to start doing. And we had a conversation before today took place a little bit about independent contributors, individual contributors inside organizations, and how historically the path for someone to grow was to get headcount, right? And you're not going to become a leader in this organization if you don't manage people. And there is plenty of room to be a successful, highly contributing, highly valuable member of an organization who doesn't manage people. And that will often require changes to how you run things, how you bonus people, how you promote people, how you title people, how you put them into your hierarchy differently. You know, I worked with an amazing artist for many years, Joshua Davis, who he joined our team for a couple of years, probably 3, maybe even more years. And we didn't know how to like absorb Josh into our ecosystem. We had to change our ecosystem. We had to change the way he could work and collaborate with our team because he was a true IC, right? Like he needed to work in his own path and in his own way. And it was bumpy and it was sloppy at times and we didn't always get it right. But we learned, you know, even finite things like what kind of space do you need to do your work? And what do we need to change in our space to accommodate your process? And those things made a better terrarium for work to grow.
How do you start to figure out what you shouldn't be doing and what you should be doing?
I think listening is probably the first step in that process. And that sounds simple, but it's actually one of the hardest things because as business people and as problem solvers, and frankly, even as creatives, our tendency is to hear a problem and then solve. right? There is a middle step that we often skip, which is ask good questions and listen. And so, but we just leave, because we got 100 problems a day. And so we got this one, okay, what are we gonna do to solve it? Let's do this, this, and this, and let's move on to the next one. It's gonna take a little longer. It's gonna probably make you a little more uncomfortable. You might have to change some behavior, but if you're willing to stop, ask questions, and listen, you'll find where the warts on the business are and what needs to be changed much faster than making those mistakes in perpetuity.
Yeah.
What about individual contributors on the client side? I mean, we know what these structures are that exist, right? And there's so many gatekeepers and roles and organizational models, and there's the product and service people and the marketing people. It just struck me that it could be helpful if there was almost a person who could advocate for artists inside of certain organizations, and that doesn't really exist. It's supposed to be us, or it's supposed to be you, but someone closer to the business could be helpful, at least for a period of time, maybe.
I'd almost like suggest that could also be a committee instead of just one individual, right? Because there's like more to come out of that, more voices to sort of like help support that, like a group.
No, but I do agree with that in the sense that if there is someone to take you through that whole journey of working with a brand or a client, that you have a point person to go to voice any concerns or stipulations, or that someone can tell you the expectations or how things are going to work from their side, because sometimes there is a little bit of miscommunication or lost in translation. And so having someone that can translate between the two, that would be great, because I think you often get this contract with all of these terms, but in the real world of just living through that step by step as a campaign is rolled out or an initiative is rolled out, I think having a point person would be fantastic.
An interpreter.
Yeah, an interpreter. And then in turn, that interpreter can go back to a committee or can go back to the institution or the company, and then they're the one that says, next time, we can improve it by doing X, Y, Z. So every time that interaction or that interpreter or that kind of, each side is getting more and more succinct as they work together.
Yeah.
Makes me think also of like rethinking the artist in residency type thing for brands,
Yeah.
if that could be a way along with this person to start to change the thing from within, or at least people's perception from within.
Yeah, we have such a culture of consuming. So like you just said, what if when a client works with an artist, they see it as a residence, they see it as an investment versus taking and spilling out and moving on to the next. Like, I think it's just a little bit of a change in mind of seeing what that consuming is and how to plant seeds when you're consuming instead of throwing out trash and not recycling. Like, how do we start to recycle those relationships so that they have a long-term growing effect on the future?
And agreeing with that, a way to think about that as an organization is sometimes to find the balance between orchestra and jazz in your system, right? Like, there's some structure and there's some things we do need, and if we do this repeatedly well, things will go well, but we also have to allow for that improvisation and that flourish and that sort of that thing that we never anticipated, but oh my God, this is such a great thing. How do we accept that and not reject it just because it didn't fit inside the machine that we built?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see a lot of fear, right? And there's nothing wrong with any client that has fear. That's
Right.
okay, that's totally normal. I think it is just a matter of getting people to embrace that journey that you talked about, because if you're in marketing and you are running a program, a partnership, it could be the most exciting part of your life and your career, but I think people are not thinking of it that way. They're thinking about, hitting the timeline, talking to the boss, going and advocating for it. So I think what you're talking about is like a shift in mindset.
Bravery comes
Bravery.
to mind. Love comes to mind.
Oh.
And the more, full potency of that to change things. Yeah, bravery feels like the opposite of fear to me often.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about a contract that would include the words bravery and love.
That's where we want to go.
How
That's
do
the
you
world we wanna-
encourage people to think of bravery and love when in their mind they're just walking into their 9 and
Right.
5 to get the job done to meet this
well,
quota?
that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
They've got a heart that's beating.
Yeah,
So I don't know. They usually have children.
yeah.
They're thinking long term. So there are ways, but I agree. I mean, I see the same contracts you see often. So I know what we're dealing with on a day to day. But I also think there's there's the possibility of change.
Yeah.
Do you think that we're in a moment, there's been so much change over the last 2 years. Everything that we have done in the past has shifted, right? Like we work differently, we're remote, we talk to our clients differently. Like this does seem like the moment that there would be openness to a giant shift because we've proven that we can do things very differently.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we have permission to walk about the cabin, right? Like we're in this moment where no one's going to question the way we used to. Like no one should rush to go back to what it felt like 3 years ago. I was talking with someone the other day and coming out here from New York. This was the second or third flight I've been on since the pandemic, and historically, a flight was work time, and I would sit down and I'd crack open the laptop and I would do it. And I realized on the flight out here, I don't need to do that right now. Like what? I'm going to actually crack open the book that I always bring and never read. And so it's an idiosyncratic me version of it, but what are the versions of that we're doing inside our organizations, and how can we sort of embrace that permission slip that we've all been given to try something new and to see how that fits and is accretive to the overall business's growth.
So nice to sit next to someone so positive, I just imagine that we're drawing this line and then we're dragging a magic giant eraser behind us. So we create change, but then we also erase it. And so I think we need to draw with markers and big pens that it's harder to erase the progress that has already happened.
That's a good mind.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah,
I love that.
it's beautiful.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, we all recognize the challenge, I think.
Yeah.
I think you can be positive but discerning and realistic, So it's really, but we just had this thing with the union happen where, it started very small and then a huge, a pretty significant change in the system. But I always think it's content and context also, if we're all showing up, but what are we making? That's the piece of are we contributing to the more beautiful world? Are we creating better futures instead of more dystopian futures? All this stuff that I think also should be part of the conversation along with the shadow work.
Yeah.
And it's all these pieces are part of the conversation now. And I think to the point of I feel like it's changed more than people realize it. I think people are catching up to how drastically the work place and the work system has changed and in a way deconstructed itself and is reconstructing itself. And so there is an opening. Those are cracks.
Yeah.
Those are cracks. So
And I love that opening too, because the other thing I've seen, when these cracks are appearing, what I've seen too is this ability for people to find their community, right?
Yeah.
To actually come together, either as artists or as people in the union or whatever it is, to point at the harm that's been caused and come together and ask for more.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen that more and more, and I've also seen how powerful that's been.
Well, that's the coalition. I think if it's just you against the thing, it's going to get erased.
Yeah.
And
If
to
it's
do it-
you and every amazing artist doing amazing things,
Yeah.
then they're going to get scared maybe first, but then they're going to come to this.
And I think we can do that without pointing fingers. We can do that with holding a hand out and saying,
Let's have a conversation. Yeah. Bringing them in. Let's talk about this. Yeah.
Bravery instead of fear. Oh,
So-
I know. Yeah, go ahead.
We've got bravery
Yeah.
and love in contracts.
listening.
Drawing the line while erasing it behind us.
Yeah, that's really good.
We've got tons of empathy and a massive moment for change. So this is just the beginning of our conversation. Coming together with you all has been absolutely amazing and very positive. I mean, I just believe that if this sort of sentiment and this kind of collaboration continues, we can actually make change. And so the goal is for us to partner together. The Artists in Residence program is going to go on for months. Shantell and I and others are going to be having many conversations about artists' rights and collaboration with brands. And the goal is to get everyone else involved. So anyone that's watching, please feed in. We're going to be asking questions. This is just the very beginning, and your voice will help. I think there's tons of things that we haven't discussed and so many ideas that could be very small change that could add up to something incredibly big. And so for the next few months, we're going to keep doing this. So we're going to talk about what's happening. We're going to listen. We're going to learn. And then in March, we're going to hit the stage at South by Southwest. And we're going to be talking about what change has been made and what change we'd like to see in the future. And then hopefully everyone, will feel like there's been positive movement. I think it's absolutely possible.
Yep, we're planting seeds.
Yeah, let's plant those seeds. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been an absolute
Yeah.
pleasure.
Thank you.
You're all
Yeah,
amazing.
Thank you.
So much love.